Johnny here for Johnny's Car Care and Advice. So today what I want to ask is, will there be a V8 option for the 2021 Ford Bronco, or if we're even likely to get a V8 option in 2022? So let's jump right in and try to answer the question of whether we're ever going to get a V8, that's Ford's 5-liter engine, in this bad boy right here, the Bronco. Now, in doing so, we're going to have to look at, the Bronco's off-road capabilities, what it's built for. We're also going to look very quickly at, current government regulations and what's coming up. We're also going to look at the current 2.7 liter and see what that offers us versus the 5-liter V8. So in simple terms, we're going to look at power specs and fuel economy, as well as government regulations and what the tendency towards what governments are doing to increase fuel economy, in order to really, figure out and give us a spot-on idea of whether we're going to get a 5-liter in the Bronco. So to do justice to this question, we really need to look at what the 5-liter currently is offering. I absolutely love my 5-liter in my Mustang, my 2018 Mustang. It's a fantastic engine. It's, state of the art because, contrary to popular belief, which I think would lend to believe that a V8 isn't fuel efficient, this V8 is fuel efficient. It's got similar fuel economy to the other engines that Ford is offering. However, if you do compare it to the 2.7 liter twin turbo EcoBoost engine, there is a difference. Now that's 3 miles per gallon. I took that from Fuel Economy government website. And when I looked into things a little further, 3 miles per gallon on an individual perspective doesn't make much of a difference at all. It's $150 per year on average that you would spend in extra fuel for a 3 mile per gallon difference. Now, I hope that wouldn't influence very many buyers' decisions, because otherwise, exciting, really cool, fast vehicles are going to be put back to a bygone era where we're going to see less and less of them and eventually won't get any at all. So, the consumer really does decide in a large part what gets produced. So, I think if we all do the math and look at it, we would all want a 5-liter Bronco. Because, the V8, if it's only going to cost $150 in fuel, why not? Now, this leads us to another question. And that question is, what are governments around the world currently doing in regards to regulations for fuel economy? Well, in this sense, it's not that promising. We reduce our chances of getting a V8 in the Bronco because generally, on a global scale, governments are putting in regulations that are causing manufacturers to put smaller, less powerful engines in their vehicles. Now, if you look at the CAFE government regulation, that would dictate, if that ever does fully come to fruition, that's going to cause manufacturers to have a very high, I believe it's 50 miles per gallon average across the board. So, car companies are going to have to figure out which models get, more fun, fuel burning engines with lots of power, and which other vehicles are going to just be, 100% electric or hybrid. So, that's one small strike against the chances of getting a V8 in the Bronco, because for a manufacturer, if they're going to sell 300,000-400,000 models, let's say Ford sells 300,000 Broncos per year, well, the 3 miles per gallon is going to make a big difference for Ford to achieve that 50 mile per gallon overall average across all their models. So I think what this means is that if we do get a 5-liter V8 in the Bronco, they're going to have to reserve it to a very high-end trim, a specialty model, to make sure that they don't sell, 200,000-300,000 vehicles with that engine option, bringing up their overall average. Now we have to look at power specs. What do power specs tell us in regards to our likelihood of getting a V8? So the power spec story for the 5-liter is a bit similar to what we saw in my previous video for asking the question of whether the 4-cylinder engine is any good and what's wrong with it. Now, in that video, I concluded that the 4-cylinder turbo is as good, if not actually better. And I feel it's better than a 6-cylinder, like a 3.6-liter non-turboed 6-cylinder. And this power chart, does speak to that. Essentially, what this chart is telling us is that Ford's 2.3-liter 4-cylinder engine has a lot of torque right off the bat. So it's, good for off-roading, and it's just good for, pressing down on the pedal, getting instant power, and having fun. But the 5-liter actually has quite a bit of torque at low end. So, in regards to off-roading, the 5-liter would make an amazing engine because it has a ton of torque, around 325 pound-feet of torque, around the 2500 RPM range. So it's very powerful at low end. So, let's try to figure this out. Now, as promised earlier on in the video, I will look at what that third option, engine option, likely will be from Ford. So let's look at the F-150, its current power specs, to give us an idea of, what we're getting out of the 5-liter, what our chances of getting this engine are. Now, looking at the 5-liter engine, looking at this chart here, we see that it has 400 pound-feet of torque at 4,500 RPM. And if we compare that to the 2.7-liter, the story doesn't bode well. The 2.7-liter, which is more fuel efficient, is getting also 400 pound-feet of torque, that at only 2,750 RPM. So on paper already, this is a big plus for the 2.7-liter, and not so great for the 5-liter. I looked at torque spec sheets, and actually the 5-liter, though, while it does make 100% of its power for torque at 4,500 RPM, it's still very powerful around 2,500 RPM. So this does not put a strike on it, but on paper, when you put it on a spec sheet, the 2.7-liter does look more interesting for a Bronco, because once again, the Bronco's made to go off-road and you want that low-end torque. And also, while we look at horsepower, we may notice that there's a difference. There's less horsepower on the 2.7-liter engine. It is getting that horsepower at a lower RPM, which wouldn't necessarily be all that important for, let's say, a Mustang, but when it's for a truck or a Bronco and you want to go off-roading, you want more horsepower at a lower end. So, here are two factors that point to the fact that, Ford must be very happy with their choice of picking the 2.7-liter EcoBoost over the V8 5-liter. But does this mean we're not going to get a 5-liter on a specialty model? Well, not necessarily. We need to look more into this. Now, looking at speed, for the F-150, the 2.7-liter EcoBoost engine, it is fantastic. It's one of its fastest options. Car and Driver tested it out and was able to get to 60 miles per hour in only 5.7 seconds. So, for everyone who's saying I'm not gonna buy a Bronco if it doesn't come with a V8, well, if it's for the sound, I can understand. But if it's about power, well, forget about it. The 2.7-liter is excellent. So let's make a quick recap. The 5-liter is fuel efficient unless you're looking at selling, several 100,000 of them, in which it causes problems with future government regulations for overall fuel economy for manufacturers, in which they can receive fines. So, the 5-liter, it's got power. It's a blast to drive. It would be fantastic off-roading. Now on paper, the spec sheet, the 2.7-liter with its low-end torque does look like a really huge positive factor for anyone who wants to go off-roading, and I'm positive they're going to love that engine, and Ford has made it. Ford wants to sell them. It's a fuel-efficient engine, so they're only offering it for less than it's an option on every model for less than $2,000. So, that's incredible. But because of those government regulations, and even some parts of the world have huge taxes if your engine is large. So, that's another factor that says that, we're likely going to get a third option for an engine, and it's not going to be the 5-liter. Now, what will it likely be? Well, Car and Driver released a video, a real life video of what's likely going to be called the Warthog Special Edition Bronco. And in listening to that video, that didn't sound at all like my V8. It didn't sound like any V8. It did sound, however, like a powerful, hefty 6-cylinder. So they speculated, and I'd speculate as well, that that's the 3.5-liter V6. And now the Warthog is a special edition, but that doesn't mean that later on Ford might not, come maybe in 1, 2, or 3 years, or maybe for the next model, which should come out in about 5 years when they refresh the model. It doesn't mean that they won't allow a third option to be purchased like they do the 2.7. Now that's going to depend on the pressure they receive from the consumer. And let's look at that 3.5, because there's now 2 options for a 6-cylinder 3.5-liter EcoBoost engine from Ford. So looking at the power specs of the 2021 F-150, we can tell that the Warthog has every reason to use a 3.5-liter EcoBoost engine. Now that's also what the Ford GT uses, but on an F-150, what's quite impressive is you're getting now 500 pound-feet of torque at low RPM, 3,100 RPM to be exact, and 400 horsepower. But I'd argue if Ford wants to, help their chances with getting to 50 miles per gallon, or whatever government regulation they decide to really go forward with. Right now, it's looking like 50 miles per gallon. What they're likely going to use is an even more exciting engine, and that's the 3.5-liter Power Boost. And this engine is mucho fun. It's got a lot more power. It's got 570 pound-feet of torque. Now let's take a minute to think about that. That's insane. That's the type of torque I'd expect to be getting out of a vehicle that costs over $150,000. So that Power Boost engine has got a lot going for it, especially when you add the fact that it's got 430 horsepower. So if you're a Bronco fan and, you really want something exciting out of the Bronco, you need to forget about the V8, because program manager and the chief engineer at Ford said there'd be no V8 because of CO2 regulations. And they also they said there doesn't seem to be a demand for it. They're sure that once people try the 2.7-liter EcoBoost, that there'll be no demand for the V8, or very little, because of the torque and fuel economy that the 2.7-liter offers. Now, I would beg to differ. I'd say that there's actually a lot of people asking for a V8. So this is what we need to do, guys and gals. We need to ask and put pressure to get that 3.5-liter EcoBoost engine, the twin turbo, or ideally the Power Boost, as an option on all models. Because right now, one of those 2 engines is almost certainly going to be in next year's Warthog. This is going to be a very expensive edition, and if we want some insane power and a little bit more sound, we're not going to get it from the V8. There's a final nail was put into the coffin when those 2 heads at Ford said there'd be no V8, and what we need to focus on as a group is putting pressure on getting a 3.5-liter EcoBoost into the Bronco, and ideally the Power Boost, because I'm not just, talking without having tried it. I have a 2011 F-150. It has 170,000 miles. It goes great. It only has 420 pound-feet of torque, and it's a lot, but I say only because the new EcoBoost has 500 pound-feet of torque, and the Power Boost has 570 pound-feet of torque. And this is why we need to stop, really focusing and kind of crying over spilt milk we're not getting a V8, so let's focus on getting an insane engine, and that insane engine would be the power boost, the hybrid power boost, and we need to put pressure and, you know, really put a lot of demand on getting that as an option on every model. Because when it comes down to it, you know, especially if it's a hybrid, we're going to be really happy off-roading because, 570 pound-feet of torque at low RPM is just perfect. And we're also going to be really happy because even if the engine option costs, $3,000-$4,000 more, the fact that it's hybrid and should save us about 30% fuel. We look at the 2020 F-150 EcoBoost getting an average of, if I look at liters per 100 kilometers, it was getting 13, and now it's down, the power boost brings it down to 9.8 liters. That's about 30%. We'd have fuel economy and an insane amount of torque and more fun than we'd even get out of the V8. And, like I said, we're not getting that V8. So let's put the pressure where it can actually count and, get something really fun and exciting. Now, if this has been helpful, please like and subscribe. And I've got a video on the Bronco Warthog coming out soon.